Okay, in today's PowerPoint presentation, we're going to talk about atrioventricular blocks. Just a quick introduction to give us an idea of what we might see in rhythm strips affecting the AV node. So what are AV blocks? Well, they are characterized by the conduction impairment between the atria and the ventricles of the heart. The impairment can be a retardation or a slowing down of the conduction impulses, or a complete elimination of the following QRS complex after a P wave. There are four types of AV blocks we're going to talk about today. The first one, first degree AV block, which is a prolonged PR interval that just stays the same. You never lose a QRS complex. And there are two second degree AV blocks. One is the Winke block, one is the Mobitz. And finally, there is a third degree or a complete heart block that we will talk about last. So in today's presentation, we're going to review the heart conduction system real quickly, just to remind ourselves what everything looks like inside the heart for the electrical conduction impulses. Then we're going to talk about the AV blocks themselves, so all four of them, we're going to go into more detail about them. And then at the end, we're going to have a few rhythm strips to go over to just check our knowledge for what we went over today, and then we will quickly review that 5-step process we use for every rhythm step before that. So here we're going to talk real quickly about the heart conduction. And we're going to talk about mainly just the SA node, the AV node or AV junction, and the ventricular conduction pathways, just real quickly. Even though we're not going to talk about any issues with those conduction pathways in the ventricles, it's a good thing to just get started because we're going to talk about it later in this class. So up here at the top we see the SA node, the sinus node. That is our pacemaker. As we all know, that's what sets everything off. That gives us our nice heart rate, ideally about 70-80 beats a minute. And as that electrical impulse travels through the atria, it gets down to our AV node right here, which we all know slows it down just a little bit, ideally a little less than 0.2 seconds. And then the impulse continues through the bundle of His into our bundle branches. Down here, here's the right bundle branch and the left bundle branch. And so what we're focusing on today is issues in the heart that affect right here in the center. Okay, let's talk about the first degree AV block. What makes this unique is that your PR interval is greater than the 0.20 seconds we are looking for in our 5-step process. Regular PR interval is at 0.12 to 0.20, and in this PR, we can see down here at the bottom in this rhythm strip, is greater than one whole box or greater than the 0.20 seconds. Something that's unique about this AV block compared to all the others is that every atrial impulse is conducted to the ventricles. One other thing is that the QRS complex in this is always narrow in the absence of any other heart defects. Okay, let's talk about the second degree blocks. The first one, the type 1, is also known as the Winke block, and this is the easiest one for me to remember because of the little limerick that goes with it called, so that it goes, longer than a drop, it must be a Winke block. Well, what does that longer and longer mean? Well, in the Winke block, the PR interval increases in length between each beat until an impulse does not get down to the ventricles. If we look at this rhythm strip at the bottom of the screen, we can see that right here in this first beat, PR interval looks pretty normal, just under 2.2 seconds. In the next one, it's actually almost 1.5 boxes long, so it's definitely really long. And then in this third and final one, it's really huge. And then we have this one right here. We got this nice little P wave, but no QRS complex. So to go back to that nice little saying, longer than a drop, it must be a Winke block. When we describe these, we also describe the conduction ratio, so the number of P waves to the number of QRS complexes. And they can be 2 to 1, 3 to 2, or anything. In the example we have below, it is a 4 to 3, so we have 4 P waves, 2, 3, and 4, to 3 QRS complexes. There's that one right here. So it is a second degree type 1 AV block with a 4 to 3 conduction ratio. In the absence of any other heart issues, the QRS is always narrow in these, and it is the most common of the second degree heart blocks. Okay, let's move on to the type 2 second degree AV block that's known as the Mobitz. This one is different from the Winke block, wherein the PR interval stays the same, but an occasional QRS complex is dropped. In the example below, that we see the same conduction ratio as before, a 4 to 3, but only one QRS complex is dropped. In some type 2 Mobitz AV blocks, you'll drop more than one QRS complex in a row. The QRS complexes are often wide, not like this one here in the bottom, which is pretty close to a 0.12 to 0.20, but often you'll see almost a full ventricular style QRS complex. Just like in the other one, the conduction ratio is the P waves to QRS complexes, and below, just like that first one, it is 4 to 3. Let's look at these two type 2 AV blocks side by side. In the top we see the Winky-Bach, in the bottom we see the Mobitz. And here we see the longer than a drop. It must be a Winky-Bach. And here we see the same PR intervals over and over again until we lose a QRS complex. So, longer than a drop, it must be a Winky-Bach. And if we just drop one after regular PR intervals, it is a Mobitz. Okay, let's move on to our fourth and final AV block of this presentation, the third degree AV block, or a complete heart block. In this one, you have P wave electrical impulses that never make it to the ventricles. So you're going to see a P wave that's just going off at a very regular interval. So down here at the bottom, these are actually pretty flat P waves, but it'll give you an idea of P wave, P wave, P wave, P wave, P wave. The P to P interval is going to stay the same. And intermixed with those, you're going to see beats. In this case, you have two beats on this one that look pretty wide. These are ventricular beats. You may also have a junctional beat if the third degree AV block is high enough in that AV node that a junctional pacemaker site can kick off. One way you're going to be able to tell the difference between a junctional and ventricular beat, escape beat, is the width of the QRS complex and also the rate. So as we talked about earlier, junctional escape complexes are a little bit faster than the ventricular escape complexes. So like I said before, P waves are at regular intervals. QRS complexes are usually at regular intervals. And where the QRS complex originates can be determined whether or not it's a narrow or a wide QRS complex. So real quickly, now that we've gone over all those AV blocks, let's do a quick test your knowledge. What's the rhythm? Before we do that, let's review the 5-step process of rate, rhythm, P waves, PR interval, and QRS complexes. So rate, we're looking at the beats per minute. Rhythm, is it regular or irregular? P waves, are they round, upright, and similar? Is there a P for every QRS and a QRS for every P? The PR interval, is it greater or less than 0.2 seconds? So remember, if it's greater and stays the same length over and over again than 0.2 seconds, we have that first degree block. And then the QRS complex, is it narrow or wide? Okay, for our first rhythm strip, let's go through the 5-step process. I put all 5 steps down there at the bottom of the screen, so let's look at this real quick. Let's look at the rate. The rate looks to be about 75 or 80 beats per minute. The rhythm, it actually looks pretty regular. If you drew it out, it actually would be regular between the beats, but then there's that missed beat, so that makes it a little odd. I wrote down regular. P waves, are they round, upright? Yes, they are. Is there a P for every QRS? Every QRS has a P before it. Is there a QRS for every P? No, there is not. So check, that's a weird thing. Let's look at the PR intervals next. You know what? They aren't the same. They keep getting longer. So that first one in the sequence is pretty short, looks pretty good, and then by the end, we're looking at almost 1.5 boxes, a little over 1.5 big boxes in the PR interval, so it's getting longer. And then finally, is the QRS narrow or wide? In this case, it is narrow. Okay, so let's look at the weird parts of this rhythm strip. There is not a QRS for every P, and the PR interval gets longer. Which AV block is this? If you're thinking longer than a drop, it must be a Winky-Bach. You are correct. Okay, let's look at the next rhythm strip. Here we have a rhythm that looks really slow, so we're already thinking this is not good. How slow is this going? Well, let's do it by counting up all the little blocks in between the QRS complexes, putting that under the 1500 and dividing. If we did that, we'll come out with 27 beats per minute. So yeah, this is not good. Next, let's look at the rhythm. Is it regular or irregular? Well, the distance in between each QRS complex is the same with the PRs, or the P waves. So this is actually a regular rhythm. P waves, they are round, they are upright, they are uniform, and they are all over the place. So we're feeling good so far. Is there a P for every QRS? Yeah, there is a P before every QRS. But there's not a QRS after every P, so that's a red flag. Okay, let's move on to the PR interval. In this case, they are all the same. They are actually just under 0.2. Not too bad. And then the QRS, is it wide or narrow? You know what? These are wide. So what are we thinking? I'm thinking this is a second degree type 2 Mobitz. So like I said earlier, this is where we see these wide QRS complexes in a Mobitz. And then what's the conduction ratio? I see 2 QRS complexes for every one QRS complex for every 2 P waves. So we got a 2-to-1 conduction ratio. Okay, now let's move on to our third rhythm strip. Okay, so first, rate. What do we see here? Slow. Very slow. If we do like we did in the last one, we find out that it is a 37 beat per minute rhythm strip. That's not good. Rhythm. Is this thing regular or irregular? If we look at the QRS complexes, they're actually pretty regular. But then we also look at the P waves, those are regular, but they're at a different rate. So maybe we need to sit and think about that being a little bit weird. P waves. Are they round? Are they upright? They are uniform. Yes, they are. Is there a P before every QRS? Yes, there is. Is there a QRS after every P? No, there is not. Another red flag. The PR interval. One part of the strip it's really short, and another part it's really long. That's not good. And the QRS complexes, are they narrow or are they wide? They are wide. So what is this rhythm strip? If you are thinking it is a third degree AV block, you are correct. The rate of the P waves is one rate, almost 80 beats per minute. The rate of the QRS complexes, down at just under 40, is another. That is a hallmark sign of a third degree AV block. Some people might have thought this is a winky block because the PR interval keeps getting longer and longer, and yes, it does, but remember, this is just a short little strip. If you look at the entire rhythm strip, the PR interval would be all over the place. Okay, and our final rhythm strip. Let's do a quick 5-step on this one. What is the rate? Well, let's see. Looks to be about 80-ish beats a minute. 70, 80 beats a minute. That's not too bad. Is the rhythm regular? Why, yes, it is. The P wave intervals are the same. The QRS complexes are the same distance apart. Hey, we're doing pretty well. Let's look at the P waves. Are they round? Are they upright? Are they uniform? Yes, they are. Is there a QRS for every P? Yes. Is there a P for every QRS? Yes. What is the PR interval? Well, actually, it looks to be pretty good at about 0.12, 0.13. And finally, are the QRS complexes wide or narrow? They are narrow. There are no red flags on this one. It's between 60 and 100 beats per minute. This is a sinus rhythm. So just always go back and remember what normal looks like. Here's what it is, a good sinus rhythm.